Today we're going to talk about homeostasis. And as we talk about homeostasis, remember that this is one of our characteristics of life. So it's one of the things that determines whether or not something is living, is if it can maintain homeostasis. And so now we're going to look really in depth at what homeostasis is. Today our essential question is, how does the body maintain homeostasis? So let's start off with a basic definition of homeostasis. The simplest way to think about it is that homeostasis means balance. And so when we were learning about transport in cells, we were learning about how things move across cell membranes until they reach equilibrium. Well, homeostasis is kind of equilibrium for an entire organism or for your body. So homeostasis is the ability of the body to maintain a relatively constant internal environment regardless of environmental changes. And so if you look around the room that you're in right now, it's probably around 70 some degrees in there. And yet if we took your body temperature, it would be closer to 98. And so what you're seeing there is, regardless of the environment, the internal environment has remained constant. So not that you need to write this information down, but you do need to realize all of the systems and how complex homeostasis really is in an organism. And so organisms need to maintain a balanced and a stable concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Humans need to maintain a pH about 7, so neutral. If your blood gets more acidic than that or more basic than that, you start to get sick and have different problems. We also need to maintain a concentration of nutrients and waste. So we need to be bringing nutrients in and we need to be removing waste. And if those concentrations change, bad things can happen. We also need to maintain a relatively constant concentration of salts and electrolytes. And that's really so that our bodies are able to communicate and function, or our cells, between different situations. The volume and pressure of water inside and outside the cells has to remain constant. We definitely don't want systems going into plasmolysis or cytolysis situations, as we saw in cellular transport, and we need to maintain a stable body temperature. This table here is just for you to look at if you want to see what happens if you don't have enough of these different things, or even if you have too many of these things. So homeostasis really is staying within that healthy range and your body maintaining that healthy range. And it is really important at this point to remember that homeostasis is not static. It's just like when we talked about dynamic equilibrium. So in regards to homeostasis, your body is always responding and adjusting to different stimuli in order to maintain those conditions as close to the set point as possible. And so if it's not tightly regulated and if the system goes out of whack, then we start to see disease. And so what are some of the diseases that we can see? Well, vitamin C deficiency can lead to scurvy, and scurvy can cause periodontal disease, which you can see in the picture there. His teeth are falling out because his periodontal disease is so severe. And so it will also cause muscle fatigue and aches, rash, diarrhea, and vomiting. Vitamin D deficiency can cause lots of different things, but one of the things that it can cause is rickets. And so you can see in the way that these children's bones are formed, they're not formed correctly. And that has to do with a lack of vitamin D or being out of whack as far as homeostasis is concerned. So you do need to know the homeostatic control mechanisms. So these 4 points in the process of maintaining homeostasis are important. And you'll see in the next slide that there's a diagram of this. And so you either need to know the diagram or you need to study the words, but whatever way, you just need to know the process. So the first thing that we start with is what we're going to refer to as the variable. And we're calling it a variable because it can be any factor in the organism's internal environment that has changed, that the body has to respond to and do something about. And so it can be all kinds of things, as we saw, vitamin deficiencies, or it can be a water imbalance, whatever it is. That then is sends out a message, or that state of imbalance sends out a message that is received by the receptor. And the receptor is the structural organ that monitors for changes in the environment. The receptor's job then is to send a message to the control center that says, hey, something's out of balance. And so the control center then will look at that message and it determines the set point for the variable, it analyzes the information, and then it sends out or coordinates the appropriate response. And so then it goes to the effector that effects, I know that's bad English, but it effects the change. And the effector then is the structural organ that actually carries out the response that the control center sent out in its message. So it's the one that actually tries to bring the body back into homeostasis. And so as you can see here, you can see with the diagram, it's exactly the same thing that we just talked about. All right, so in order to maintain homeostasis, there are feedback mechanisms or feedback loops. You'll see them either way. And the first that we're going to talk about is negative feedback. And most homeostatic control mechanisms are negative feedback mechanisms. So it's the most common and it's the one that has the most examples. So a negative feedback mechanism causes the variable to change in a way that opposes the initial change. And really that's kind of a hard way of saying that it removes the condition by turning on or turning off systems. And so if my body is too hot, I remove the condition of heat by doing things that'll cool my body down. The nervous system and the endocrine system are the systems that your body mostly uses in order to maintain homeostasis. And this is especially true in negative feedback mechanisms. The goal then of negative feedback mechanisms is to prevent sudden and severe changes in the body because our bodies don't like to be shocked. And that's what happens if we have a sudden and severe change. If I were to graph a negative feedback loop, we would see this kind of S curve that focuses or centers around the set point. And so in this graph, you can see the set point is represented with that dashed line. And in this case, we're looking at blood glucose levels. And so it looks like the homeostatic set point for glucose levels is about 90 micrograms per deciliter of blood. And so you can see the blue line then represents the blood sugar or actual blood sugar levels throughout a 5-hour period. So you can see from A to B, the person obviously ate something, their blood sugar spiked up, the body responded to that and brought it down a little too low. And so then it raises it and drops it and raises it. And so you get this nice, easy, gradual response to changing blood sugar levels. So we can think about negative feedback in regards to keeping a room warm. And so in this example, the control center would be the thermostat and the effector would be the heater. The receptor would be the set point of that thermostat. And so what happens? Well, I set my room at 70 degrees. If it's hotter than 70 degrees, the heater gets shut down, right? We remove the condition until it goes back down to 70, or it most likely will go below 70. So then the heater kicks on to bring it back up to 70. And that continual response is how you keep your house warm. And so body temperature works much the same way, except as you can see in the diagram, there's a lot more steps to it. So the first thing that can happen though is we might have a body that doesn't have enough heat, and that's a condition of hypothermia. And so what happens is those enzymes, remember, only like to work in certain temperatures. And so if your body gets too cold, the enzymes shut down and then your body shuts down. And so then we can see that there can also be a condition of too much heat, such as in hyperthermia. And so the same thing, the enzymes break down, stop working. But if the heat stays high enough for a long enough period, you can also have brain damage because it actually starts to denature the structural proteins in your organs. Blood pressure is another example of negative feedback. If your blood pressure gets high, your body does things to bring it back down and vice versa. And we looked at blood glucose in regards to the graph, but we're looking at insulin and glucagon is the main hormonal controls of our blood glucose. And so diabetes is the condition where a person's body doesn't produce enough insulin in order to keep the blood sugar in check. And so if you have excess blood sugar in the veins, it actually can result in organ damage. And so if you've ever seen pictures on the internet of people that have uncontrolled diabetes, you will see that they start to lose toes and legs and things like that because of that excess sugar buildup. There is the opposite condition though too. We can have hypoglycemia, where a person's body produces too much insulin, and so there's not enough blood sugar left in the veins to actually fuel all of the different processes of cellular respiration. And so then again, you get organ damage and you can potentially decease. Osmoregulation, the regulation of water. And so you actually can have a condition called overhydration, where you have so much water so fast that all the salts and electrolytes in your system get too diluted, and that can lead to lots of issues and even death in extreme situations. And then dehydration is the opposite, where you don't have enough water, and so those salts become too concentrated for normal body function. And so again, it can lead to death. So the next feedback mechanism that we have is positive feedback. And positive feedback is really rare. And most homeostasis has nothing to do with positive feedback, but it is something that the body uses, and there are a few examples that you are responsible for knowing. So a positive feedback mechanism is going to cause the variable to change in the same direction as the original change, which results in a greater deviation from the set point. So positive feedback is when the response to an event increases the likelihood that the event is going to happen, and so it adds to the condition. So instead of trying to remove the condition, it enhances or amplifies the condition. And again, if we graphed this, it would look like the blue line, where it rises suddenly and then stops. So what are some examples? Well, contractions for labor are examples of positive feedback in many mammals and humans alike. And so oxytocin is a hormone that gets released. It makes the uterus contract. As the uterus contracts, it calls for more oxytocin, and so the cycle just continues until the baby is born. Blood clots for tissue repair. So if you cut yourself, a platelet is going to attach to that bleed point, and as one platelet shows up, it attracts another platelet, which attracts another platelet until you get a sealed wound, hopefully. And so it's all or nothing. It amplifies and then it's done. Probably the best example of positive feedback, though, is fruit ripening. And so what happens is fruit, once it hits a ripe point, starts to produce a hormone called ethylene, and it's a gas. That ethylene then diffuses out to the fruit next to the ripe fruit, which it triggers its own ripening process, which produces more ethylene, and it continues on until the fruit is overripe. And so if you've ever put bananas in a fruit basket with other fruits, everything looks fine, and you wake up the next morning and everything's brown and overripened. That's due to the positive feedback and of ethylene. So these are all of our examples of homeostasis and the different feedback loops. And so go ahead and do the summary in your notes and answer how the body maintains homeostasis. Thank you.